Ever had to stand up to someone everyone else feared?
You ever get that gut punch from your own family? The kind where they dress up their exclusion as concern for someone else's spotlight, making you feel like the villain just for existing with your unpolished edges and honest tongue. Well, that's exactly how it went down with my sister Sarah's wedding to Mark Reynolds, that slick real estate hotshot from Cleveland who charmed everyone with his easy grin and promises of a stable future, while I, Emily Harper, the 42-year-old divorced graphic designer scraping by in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, got sidelined like yesterday's news because apparently my tendency to call out BS would cramp the fairy tale vibe they all craved after Sarah's long dry spell of disappointing dates that left her desperate for any man who could foot the bill for a proper shindig. The invitation showed up late, tucked into an envelope with that fancy embossed paper smelling of money and expectation, and inside Mom had slipped a handwritten note that twisted the knife without outright saying it, something about how this was Sarah's day to shine after waiting 38 years for her prince, implying my awkward questions about Mark's short fuse or his habit of ghosting plans might steal the thunder. So I sat there on my worn couch, the one Lily my daughter had crashed on during her last college break, staring at the card with its gold foil details and feeling the familiar burn of being the family oddball, the one whose messy split from Tom still hung over every gathering like a bad cloud, complete with whispers from aunts about how I should have tried harder to keep the white picket fence intact instead of walking away when his cheating came to light. I fired off a quick text to Sarah, keeping it light with a congrats and heart emoji to mask the sting, then deleted the event from my calendar, convincing myself a quiet night with greasy takeout pizza from the corner joint and a binge of those feel-good movies about underdogs. Winning big would beat plastering on a fake smile in a ballroom packed with 200 guests who'd sooner gossip about my single status than celebrate my presence, especially since Dad had already grumbled during our last call that weddings were no place for drama queens, code for my divorce stories that made polite company squirm. Little did I know that decision, born out of self-preservation and a dash of spite, would unravel everything in ways I couldn't have scripted if I'd tried. Because as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across my living room walls lined with freelance sketches and faded photos of better days, I flipped on the local news channel to kill time. The anchor's polished voice droning about traffic backups from the big event at the Hilton's Grand Ballroom, where Sarah's reception was supposedly the talk of the town with its cascading floral arches, live band crooning classics, and an open bar flowing like the Cuyahoga River after a storm. But then the feed cut to live footage, shaky cell phone video capturing the heart of the chaos as Mark, his tux rumpled and face flushed from what looked like one champagne flute too many amid the toasts and laughter, latched onto Sarah's arm during their spotlight first dance, twisting it with a force that buckled her knees and drew a sharp cry that pierced the microphone feedback, before he reared back and delivered a open-handed slap across her cheek that echoed through the hall like a thunderclap, sending her staggering into the cake table while stunned relatives froze mid-clink of glasses and the string quartet faltered into discordant notes, the whole scene unfolding in grainy horror for anyone tuned in across central Ohio. My remote slipped from my hand as bile rose in my throat, the screen blurring through hot tears because I'd seen flickers of that temper in Mark before. The way he'd snap at waitstaff on double dates or pressure Sarah into canceling our sister lunches with excuses about his long hours, and those long sleeves she favored even in July heat now screamed warning signs I dismissed as bridal nerves, so without pausing to think I snatched my phone and dialed Mom's number. The rings dragging on until she answered in a hushed panic from what sounded like the hotel lobby, her words tumbling out that it was all a terrible mix-up from the wedding stress and Mark's exhaustion, that Sarah was just bruised but composed, already icing it in the bridal suite while they hushed the guests to prevent any ugly headlines in the morning papers. Her voice cracked with that familiar plea for discretion, the one she'd used back when Dad's tempers flared over finances during our teens, always framing it as a family matter to handle behind closed doors rather than air dirty laundry, which only ignited the fury I'd bottled up for years, making me blurt out that this wasn't some private spat, but public humiliation broadcast live, and before she could deflect with more excuses, I hung up, my fingers flying across the screen to pull up the alumni group chat from our high school days where Mark's old crowd still swapped stories, firing off a screenshot of the news clip with a pointed caption about how some bad habits from teenage blow-ups never really fade. Then blocking the family group to let the digital ripples spread unchecked. A petty but satisfying jab that had me smirking through the sobs because finally, someone else would question the golden boy's shine without me taking the heat directly. Yet as the adrenaline ebbed and I slumped back, replaying the slap in my mind with its sickening finality, my phone buzzed insistently with a text from an unknown number, Sarah's maid of honor Jenna, a no-nonsense nurse who'd always shot me straight during girls' nights, saying we had to talk immediately because the night's ugliness ran deeper than one drunken swing, involving secrets from Mark's past that the family had buried long before the vows, and as I stared at those words glowing in the dim light, the weight of my wedding no-show crashed down harder, leaving me to wonder if staying away had spared me the front-row seat to hell, or if my absence had sealed Sarah's fate in ways revenge alone couldn't fix, with the real unraveling just revving up like an engine in the dark. Stirring awake in the gray light filtering through my half-drawn blinds, the remnants of last night's shock clinging to me like a bad hangover from coffee gone cold and emotions run raw, I shuffled to the kitchen where the coffee maker gurgled its morning ritual, filling the air with that bitter aroma that always grounded me after family blow-ups, and as I poured a mug strong enough to wake the dead, Jenna's text from the night before loomed large on my phone screen, its promise of deeper secrets about Mark pulling at the threads of doubt I'd ignored for too long while Sarah played house with a man whose charm masked something rotten beneath, much like the way Tom had hidden his wandering eyes behind late-night work calls, until the divorce papers forced the truth into the open. Sipping slowly to steady my nerves, I settled at my cluttered desk surrounded by design proofs and sticky notes from freelance gigs that paid the bills but left little room for personal drama, firing up my laptop to dive into the digital underbelly of Mark Reynolds, starting with a simple Google search that unearthed his polished LinkedIn profile boasting multi-million-dollar home flips in Cleveland's upscale neighborhoods and testimonials from clients who raved about his aggressive negotiation style. But digging deeper into forums and review sites revealed a shadow side, anonymous posts from disgruntled associates describing heated arguments that escalated to thrown clipboards and veiled threats during stalled deals. One particularly vivid account from a female realtor who detailed how he'd backed her into a corner at an open house over a competing bid, his voice low and menacing in a way that echoed the controlling vibes I'd picked up during our few joint dinners where he'd interrupt Sarah mid-sentence to correct her on everything from menu choices to family anecdotes. That trail led me to reach out to Lisa, my old sorority sister now in human resources at a firm just outside the city, crafting an email that played it casual like we were catching up over wine rather than swapping dirt on a potential abuser, and she rang me back by mid-morning, her tone hushed as if walls had ears, confirming what my gut had screamed for months. That Mark had racked up 2 formal complaints during his stint at a rival agency, allegations of verbal harassment toward female colleagues who pushed back on his sales tactics, all quietly settled with payouts and gag orders that kept his record squeaky clean on paper but whispered about in industry circles like the open secret at a church potluck where everyone nods knowingly but changes the subject when kids wander near. Her intel hit like validation mixed with acid, reminding me of the bruises Sarah once waved off as from bumping into furniture during packing for the move, excuses that mirrored Mom's deflections about Dad's rough days at the factory. So when Mom's voicemail pinged in shortly after, her voice laced with that practiced calm urging me to let sleeping dogs lie for Sarah's fragile recovery and the family's reputation in our tight-knit suburb where scandals spread faster than flu season, I felt the revenge itch flare up hot and unyielding, channeling it into action by anonymizing Lisa's details into a concise tip sheet and emailing it to that investigative reporter I'd networked with years ago through a graphic project for the local paper, the one who thrived on peeling back the veneer of small-town Success stories to expose the cracks underneath, titling my submission behind the wedding slap, a pattern of power plays without attaching my name or any traceable links. Then leaning back with a wry chuckle at the thought of Mark squirming under fresh scrutiny while his precious steals teetered. A clever sidestep that scratched the justice itch without dragging me into the fray directly, since I knew from Tom's custody battles how courts loved to paint whistleblowers as bitter exes or jealous kin. The satisfaction lingered through lunch, a sandwich thrown together from fridge scraps while I monitored the online buzz, watching as the reporter's outlet teased an follow-up piece on workplace red flags in real estate without naming names yet. The comments section lighting up with speculation that had distant cousins from our family tree piping in with vague agreements about knowing his type. But that bubble burst when my phone lit up with Sarah's caller ID around 3 in the afternoon. Her voice emerging strained and accusatory as she demanded to know if I'd fed the media beast, insisting the slap was an isolated blip from wedding day booze and nerves, that Mark had spent the night on his knees apologizing with flowers and vows to change. Painting a picture of remorse that clashed violently with the patterns Lisa outlined and the voicemail trove Jenna hinted at. Yet when I gently prodded about those summer sleeves and the canceled plans that isolated her from friends, she faltered, admitting in a whisper that his jealousy could flare like a match to dry grass, but swearing it never went physical before the reception. Begging me to rein in whatever leaks I'd started because they threatened not just her marriage, but the fragile peace she'd built after years of being the good daughter, who never rocked the boat like I did with my divorce fireworks. Her plea twisted something in me, a flicker of guilt over my no-show at the wedding that might have given her an ally in the crowd to pull her away before the dance floor turned battlefield. But before I could navigate that minefield, she shifted tones, proposing an uneasy alliance where I'd help quash the rumors in exchange for a seat at the family table again, promising to share details from her side that could explain why Mom and Dad turned a blind eye, leaving me frozen mid-sip of cooling coffee as the call dropped with her hurried goodbye, the offer dangling like a lure in murky waters and forcing me to question if this was a genuine olive branch or just another layer of the denial that had kept her chained. With the afternoon sun slanting low and casting long shadows that mirrored the uncertainty coiling tighter in my chest about whether teaming up would unearth healing or bury us deeper in the mess we'd all helped create. Replaying Sarah's uneasy offer in my mind as the evening shadows lengthened across my apartment walls cluttered with half-finished design sketches and reminders of Lily's upcoming visit that now felt overshadowed by this family cyclone, I found myself unable to shake the undercurrent of manipulation in her words. The way she dangled reconciliation like a carrot while downplaying Mark's patterns that mirrored too closely the tensions I'd witnessed growing up in our modest Akron split-level where Dad's factory frustrations often spilled over into sharp commands and slammed cabinet doors that Mom smoothed with forced laughter and extra helpings of her famous apple pie, a dynamic that taught Sarah to appease and me to question, ultimately casting me as the disruptive force who upended the status quo with my divorce rather than enduring Tom's infidelities in silence, like a proper wife. That night, sleep evading me like a guilty conscience, I rose before dawn and headed to the storage unit. On the outskirts of Columbus, where boxes of family relics gathered dust since the move after Tom's exit, pulling out faded photo albums and stacks of letters tied with rubber bands that yellowed at the edges, flipping through images of us as kids at summer barbecues where Sarah posed perfectly in sundresses while I climbed trees with scraped knees, the captions in Mom's looping script highlighting her little princess achievements and glossing over my tomboy antics that earned eye rolls from relatives who preferred the narrative of harmony over the reality of Dad's occasional rages, fueled by overtime blues and unmet promotions, memories that crystallized how our parents had modeled denial as survival. With Mom once pulling me aside after a particularly loud argument over holiday budgets to whisper that men like Dad just needed space to cool off and that airing grievances only made things worse. A lesson Sarah absorbed so deeply she repeated it with Mark by excusing his controlling texts as passionate concern during our sporadic sister chats. By mid-morning, fortified with a thermos of coffee that burned my tongue in my haste, I spread the artifacts across my kitchen table and began cross-referencing them with digital searches on my tablet. Scanning old emails from Sarah's early dating days with Mark, where she'd confided in bubbly tones about his intense drive that kept her on her toes, interspersed with subtle apologies for bailing on plans because he preferred quiet nights in. Phrases that now screamed isolation tactics I'd overlooked amid my own post-divorce scramble to rebuild a life centered on Lily's soccer games and my freelance deadlines that barely covered rent in this economy where graphic design gigs fluctuated like the stock market. The deeper I delved, the more a timeline emerged when I accessed public records through a free trial on an ancestry site, uncovering a dusty 2012 incident report from Pittsburgh where Mark's then-girlfriend had filed for assault after he allegedly shoved her against a wall during a heated dispute over his late nights at the office, the charges vanishing after she withdrew the statement citing misunderstanding. Under what smelled like pressure from his well-connected uncle in local politics, a pattern that dovetailed sickeningly with Lisa's HR whispers and the voicemail hints from Jenna, painting a portrait of a man who thrived on dominance unchecked by those closest to him, much like Dad's unaddressed tempers that left emotional bruises we all carried into adulthood. That revelation stoked the revenge fire simmering since the news broadcast, transforming it into a focused blaze as I crafted a strategy over lunch of canned soup heated in the microwave, deciding to leverage the family grapevine against itself by creating a burner account on the Facebook group for our extended relatives who thrived on reunion gossip and passive-aggressive posts about life's milestones, uploading a redacted scan of that Pittsburgh report blurred just enough to intrigue without immediate backlash, captioning it with a probing question about whether old family patterns resurface at big events like weddings, and tagging a handful of cousins who owed me favors from past holidays where I'd covered their kids' antics to keep the peace. The post going live in the early afternoon and drawing immediate traction with likes from surprised aunts and direct messages from Uncle Ray who admitted he'd heard rumblings about Mark's hot head from golf buddies, but chalked it up to bachelor stress, the digital storm brewing a satisfying chaos that forced whispers into the open without my name attached, allowing me a wry internal laugh at the irony of using their love for social scrolling to dismantle the facade they'd built around Sarah's perfect match. Yet as the notifications piled up through the afternoon, painting a picture of fracturing loyalties with cousins debating in threads whether to confront mom or let it blow over for the sake of holiday dinners, a message from cousin Becca pierced the triumph like a cold draft. Her words admitting Sarah had vented to her privately about Mark's possessive streaks that escalated after engagement photos, but pleading with me to dial back because such exposures might shatter Sarah's resolve to stay connected to the family at all, framing her as the fragile thread holding our fractured bonds together after years of me being labeled the runaway who prioritized independence over unity, a dilemma that clawed at my resolve since I'd always resented that golden child pedestal yet now saw how my revenges risked toppling it entirely and leaving her isolated in the rubble. That internal tug-of-war intensified when Dad's call came in at dusk, his gravelly voice booming through the speaker with accusations of sabotage that fueled the reporter's latest teaser article alluding to Mark's volatile history without specifics, demanding I cease my witch hunt, or face being cut off for good, but in his bluster, he let slip a bombshell that Sarah was secretly stuffing a suitcase in the guest room, wavering between bolting to Jenna's spare bed or facing Mark with ultimatums backed by the evidence I'd unearthed. His warning to mind my own business hanging in the air as he disconnected abruptly, leaving me pacing the linoleum floor with phone in hand and heart hammering because my social media salvo had cracked the surface, but potentially pushed her toward a precipice I hadn't anticipated. Just as the weight of that possibility settled, another text from Jenna materialized on my screen. Her message terse and urgent about meeting at the old family diner off the interstate tomorrow evening because she had irrefutable proof tying our parents' long-standing silence to a buried incident from their own past that explained why they'd greenlit Mark so blindly. The invitation laced with the gravity of revelations that could either forge unlikely alliances or demolish the remnants of trust we'd clung to, forcing me to confront whether pursuing this path would liberate Sarah from her cycles or entangle us all in a web spun from decades of unspoken complicity. Gripping the steering wheel of my reliable old Honda as it hummed along Interstate 70 under a sky heavy with impending rain that matched the storm brewing in my thoughts, I replayed Jenna's urgent text from the night before like a loop of bad decisions. The promise of proof about our parents' hidden history pulling me toward the family diner where we'd shared countless greasy breakfasts during road trips to Grandma's, a neutral ground that now felt charged with the potential to either bridge the chasms in our relationships or widen them into irreparable gulfs after Dad's revealing slip about Sarah's secret packing and the social media fallout that had cousins choosing sides in hushed group chats. The wipers swished rhythmically against the first fat drops as memories flooded back of those diner stops. Sarah always ordering pancakes with extra syrup to sweeten the miles while I opted for eggs over easy to cut through the travel fog. Our laughter masking the undercurrents of home, where Mom's quiet endurance of Dad's flares set the tone for what we'd tolerate in our own lives, a pattern I'd shattered with my divorce. But Sarah had mirrored by clinging to Mark's apologies like lifelines thrown in choppy waters. Arriving early to claim a corner booth with its cracked vinyl seats and the comforting scent of frying bacon that reminded me of simpler times before weddings and scandals, I nursed a bottomless cup of diner coffee black as midnight, its bitterness sharpening my focus as Jenna slipped in 10 minutes later, her nurse's scrubs rumpled from a long shift and eyes shadowed with the weight of secrets she'd carried too long for a friend she'd met through Sarah's bridal planning frenzy. Without wasting words on small talk that might dilute the gravity, she slid a small USB drive across the Formica table, explaining in a low voice that it contained a series of voicemails Mark had left Sarah over the past 18 months, captured when Sarah played them on speaker. During late-night venting sessions at Jenna's apartment after arguments that left her shaken and second-guessing her choices. The recording starting innocuous with check-ins about dinner plans, but escalating to accusatory rants about her outfits at work events or time spent with old friends like me. His tone laced with that possessive edge that demanded accounting for every minute away from his orbit, each clip a damning exhibit of the control I'd suspected but never confronted head-on during our strained sister calls where she'd deflect with wedding checklists. Listening discreetly through earbuds while the diner buzzed with lunchtime chatter from truckers and locals nursing hangovers, the raw venom in Mark's voice transported me straight to the early days of my marriage when Tom's concerned. Questions about my freelance hours masked jealousy that boiled over into silent treatments and slammed doors, a parallel that fueled my resolve to turn this evidence into something actionable, rather than letting it gather digital dust. So as Jenna outlined how Sarah had confided in her about ignoring similar red flags from our parents' playbook, Mom once admitting during a tipsy girls' night that Dad's temper had led to a hushed-up shoving match back in the late 80s during a financial crunch, swept under the rug with family counseling that never stuck. I felt the pieces of generational silence slotting into place like a puzzle revealing a cycle of endurance over escape. Energized by that clarity and the caffeine coursing through my veins, I texted cousin Becca on the drive back, proposing an impromptu gathering at the VFW hall where our annual reunions unfolded with potluck spreads and patriotic banners that hid the interpersonal minefields, framing it as a support circle for Sarah amid the media storm, but secretly plotting it as a stage for the confrontation Mark deserved after years of coasting on charm and connections that shielded his worst impulses. By evening, the hall filled with about 24 relatives milling around folding tables laden with casseroles and Jell-O salads, the air thick with awkward small talk about the weather and football scores to sidestep the elephant of the wedding video still circulating online. And when Mark arrived unannounced with his jaw clenched like a man ready to reclaim his narrative, striding in as if the group owed him solidarity, I bided my time nursing a plastic cup of punch that tasted like watered-down regret until he cornered Dad near the podium for a private word, then casually approached with printed transcripts from the USB tucked into a napkin accidentally, letting them flutter onto the bar top beside his beer where the bolded lines detailing his threats caught the eye of nearby uncles mid-conversation. The humiliation unfolded like a slow-motion comedy of errors as Mark snatched the pages, his face cycling through shades of red while cousins clustered closer, murmuring recognitions of the voice. Patterns from Sarah's relayed stories, and one aunt gasping about how it reminded her of whispers from his college days. The clever drop turning his bid for sympathy into a public roasting without me uttering a single accusation, allowing a bubble of dark humor to rise in my chest at the sight of the golden boy unraveling amid potato chip crumbs and folding chairs. Sarah pulled me into a side hallway shortly after, her makeup concealing the fading bruise, but not the turmoil in her eyes as she whispered furious gratitude mixed with blame for forcing her to file preliminary separation papers that afternoon. Admitting she'd overlooked Mark's history because Mom had vouched for his strong character based on their own buried incident where Dad's push during an argument led to a black eye explained away as a fall, a family secret Jenna's drive only scratched the surface of, the dilemma hitting me square as she questioned if my interventions healed or just accelerated the fractures we'd all ignored. Driving home through the intensifying downpour that blurred the taillights ahead, my phone erupted with voicemails, Dad's gruff ultimatums about disownment, Sarah's conflicted pleas for space to process, and then an anonymous audio clip forwarded from an unknown sender capturing Mark in the VFW parking lot, his voice snarling vows of payback against me for the exposure that could tank his career. The recording cutting off abruptly mid-threat with a crackle of static that hinted at more context. Hidden in the shadows, leaving me to pull over on the shoulder with pulse thundering because if this was the height of reckoning, the escalating dangers whispered that the real confrontation loomed larger than any family hall could contain. Easing my car back onto the rain-slicked interstate after that roadside halt where the anonymous clip of Mark's vengeful snarls had left my hands trembling on the wheel like I'd gripped a live wire, I forwarded the audio straight to the investigative reporter with a brief note attaching the VFW transcripts for good measure, framing it as another layer in the saga of unchecked tempers that thrived in the shadows of small-town respectability, knowing full well that such a tip would amplify the pressure on Mark's crumbling empire without requiring my direct involvement, since I'd learned from the custody wrangles with Tom how anonymity preserved your leverage in battles where emotions ran as hot as Ohio summers. The downpour tapered into a misty haze by the time I reached my apartment, the streets reflecting neon signs from corner stores that promised normalcy in six-packs and lottery tickets. But inside the quiet felt oppressive with the echo of Sarah's hallway confession about Mom's long-buried black eye from Dad's misguided shove during a money crunch in the 80s. A detail Jenna's USB had only alluded to through fragmented voicemails that now seemed like the missing links in our family's chain of silence, where endurance trumped exposure and apologies served as band-aids over festering wounds. Days melted into a tense limbo of dodged family calls and monitored news feeds where the reporter's outlet escalated the story with interviews from Mark's former colleagues who painted him as a bully in boardrooms who masked aggression with charisma, their accounts dovetailing with the Pittsburgh report and Sarah's relayed complaints to create a damning mosaic that led to his real estate license facing suspension hearings amid whispers of lawsuits from past victims emboldened by the wedding footage's viral reach, a sequence of consequences that brought a bitter smile to my lips during solitary dinners of reheated leftovers because my string of clever revenges from the alumni chat sparked to the napkin drop had orchestrated a downfall without me ever raising my voice in court or confrontation. Yet the triumph soured with the nagging what-if of my wedding absence that might have positioned me as the buffer to whisk Sarah away before the dance floor became her personal coliseum. That internal reckoning deepened when Sarah reached out a week later with coordinates for a neutral coffee shop in Dayton, a midway point between our lives that symbolized the fragile bridge we might rebuild or burn depending on the words exchanged over steaming lattes and shared regrets. And as I navigated the familiar route past billboards advertising family therapists and divorce attorneys that hit too close to home, memories resurfaced of our childhood drives where she'd chatter about school crushes while I tuned out Dad's radio gripes, unaware then how those early divisions foreshadowed her path of compliance and mine of confrontation that left me isolated but intact after Tom's betrayals. Sliding into the booth across from her, noting the hollows under her eyes from shelter stays and mandatory counseling sessions she'd only embraced post-slap when the evidence mounted too high to deny. We eased into the conversation with surface pleasantries about Lily's college exploits and the autumn leaves turning outside the window. But soon the dam broke as she unpacked how Mark's grip had tightened like a vice after our parents' enthusiastic endorsement during engagement dinners where Dad bonded over business tips and Mom gushed about grandkids on the horizon, admitting she'd overlooked the parallels to their own stormy start because vulnerability felt like failure in a family that prized appearances over authenticity. Her voice cracking when she revealed Jenna's full archive included a letter from Mom to her younger self about staying the course through Dad's rough patches for the sake of stability, a generational hand-me-down that explained why Sarah had waved off my warnings as sibling envy rather than protective instinct. In turn, I owned up to how my revenges stemmed from personal scars as much as sisterly love, the alumni leaks and media nudges serving as proxies for the interventions I'd shied from in person, including that fateful no-show at the wedding where a timely arrival might have diffused the tension with a sisterly arm around her waist or a pointed glare at Mark's wandering hands. Choices that now made me question if my pragmatic detachment had empowered her escape or merely delayed the inevitable explosion by leaving her to face the first dance solo. We lingered for hours as the shop emptied around us, her tentative thanks for the chain of events that prompted her separation filing mingling with accusations that my actions had fractured the family further by alienating Mom and Dad, who now stonewalled her calls with blame shifted squarely onto the troublemaker, outsider, a dynamic that forced me to confront how my witty paybacks satisfied a deep-seated need for vindication but risked scattering the bonds we'd strained to maintain through holidays and obligatory visits. As we hugged goodbye in the parking lot under a clearing sky that hinted at renewal yet carried the chill of uncertainty, a final twist arrived via certified mail waiting at my door that evening. A plain envelope from Mom containing yellowed photos from her youth with Dad in his factory uniform, one image circled in faded red marker showing her arm marked with a shadow bruise she attributed in an accompanying note to a moment of weakness. Long forgiven for the life they built, her plea scrawled in shaky script asking for grace and understanding that some cycles only shatter when individuals choose solitude over shared silence, leaving me to sift through the stack on my kitchen floor long after midnight with tears blurring the faces because Sarah's fresh start at independence echoed my own post-divorce rebirth, yet begged the lingering questions of whether my orchestrated revenges had truly liberated us or just deepened the divides, pondering if showing up that wedding night would have rewritten the script into prevention rather than fallout, and as the clock ticked toward dawn with no easy answers, the shadows of what might have been stretched endless, inviting reflection on forgiveness's fragile edge in families where love and loyalty tangled like roots beneath the surface.